The eldest is separated from the youngest by only 4.5 years. I barely got home with one babe before the next was performing thumb-sucking tricks on her sonogram. I was young, energetic, and optimistic enough to think I could be in 4 places at once. And I loved it because being a mother meant everything to me. I'd have added a 5th kid to the nest if my husband had been remotely interested in fatherhood, which, as it turns out, he was not. So I raised my girls on my own from very early on. Fortunately, child-rearing doesn't stop for absent fathers who provide zero assistance. Despite single motherhood, my daughters, from birth to tweens, were a breeze. Honestly, I don't know how I got so lucky. But notice I said birth to tweens. After that, we started adding that word to their birthdays. You know the one. It's spelled T-E-E-N. And it strikes fear in the heart of every parent because along with T-E-E-N comes hormones, spelled A-N-G-S-T. I assure you, the only thing predictable about hormones is unpredictability. Multiply that times 4, and you have my life as the mother of 4 teenage daughters. I have a freakish knowledge of all things catty, melodramatic, and life or death urgent. If I knew then what I know now, I'd have invested in massive shares of Tampax and Midol for them and Xanax for me. But I remained hopeful, thinking, they're teenagers now, but one day soon, they're going to recover. I reinforced even a spark of rational behavior with positive messages. Rated the whites from the darks. Way to use those critical thinking skills. You cooked your own mac and cheese? Way to put me out of a job. You shared something with your sister? Deliberately? Way to champion world peace. During this age of angst, I had the sex talk 4 times. Once privately with each girl. And let me tell you, they were excruciating, humiliating experiences for me. As each daughter recoiled in horror and shielded her mortified grimace while shrieking, "Oh my God! You are not talking to me about sex!" Yes, I was. On the topic of teenage pregnancies, my bubbly 17-year-old butterfly was the loudest dissenter. "That will totally never happen to me," Coco said. But not long after that announcement, I noticed my skinny girl had gained a little weight around the middle. She chalked it up to too much fast food. And since I didn't want to encourage body image issues, I let it go. Until I visited her at Hollywood Video, her part-time job, where the required uniform was a white blouse, black slacks, and a red cummerbund. When I saw Coco stretching to reach videos on the top shelves, a budding volleyball at her abdomen, my maternal instincts sounded alarm bells. But I let her finish her shift to midnight. I went home in a surreal daze, and I wondered, what would Bill Cosby do? Early the next morning, I entered Coco's room where she slept on her daybed under a girly lavender comforter, complete with eyelet dust ruffle. Fantasy posters of unicorns and fairies hung on the walls, and on her dresser were colored ink pens, textbooks, and Aaliyah CDs. I sat down on the bed beside her and pulled the covers back. "Wake up," I said. "We need to talk." I had met her at the gate between vulnerability and rebellion. Just coming to, she hadn't had time to erect the walls that shielded her from people who might hurt or betray her, a self-preservation impulse she'd learned well from the tender age of 5. I laid my hand on her swollen belly. "Do you have something you want to tell me?" Moments felt like minutes as she struggled to form words around what she needed to admit to me and to herself. A watershed of regret, embarrassment, and terror glistened in her eyes, but she could not vocalize that a life was growing inside her. What she needed from me in those moments was common sense and maturity, not the sobs lodged in my throat, but in her bare, sun-freckled face. I could only see my precious newborn, my cuddly, terrible 2-year-old, my divorced, devastated kindergartner, my sweet and sassy 3rd grader, my sports-obsessed middle schooler, and my stubborn, vivacious teenager. I knew she wished with her whole body and soul that she could turn back time. And I knew as a daughter myself that she'd rather have live crickets thrown down her shirt than feel my disappointment. So when I began to breathe again, I hugged her tightly and assured her that we were a family and we would get through this. Since she was already well into her 2nd trimester, her options were to opt out or become a young mom. Obviously, this is the sort of broadsiding that gives parents myocardial infarctions. I was only 42, and to be honest, I was as ready for my next role as a grandmother as my teenage daughter was of picking baby barf out of her belly button ring. But for Coco and her unborn child, I became a crusader for motherhood, urging her to step up and make the adult decisions that her unborn child needed. Once she saw the sonogram, and she knew she had family entrenched in her corner, she embraced the pregnancy and began planning her future with a son. And so it was that I became Nana long before I was ready for my walk-on in Polydent commercials. But you know what? That's okay. My daughter walked her own path, and today I have an awesome 13-year-old grandson who means the world to all of us. While mother-daughter relationships are especially complicated, the one thing that's not complicated is my unconditional love for each one of them. Even though my girls are grown now with families of their own, being their mom still means everything to me.